Hello, and welcome back to Spooky Town Tales, episode 16. This evening, we will be discussing creepy police calls. We've got some goodies, and it is me, Morgana, and joining me this evening is the one and only, the Colossus of Clout, Jimmy Bug.
Good evening.
The King of Crash.
The Great Bambino.
The Great Bambino! That was a pretty good introduction.
That's good.
It's better than
It's
the one.
far better than
the one
I deserve.
It's better than the one I'd planned to use. I did you a solid. Excuse the sounds in the background. It is school holidays, so we are recording at a reasonable hour because we're old people.
Stuffed into a room
We're
by the children.
We're stuffed into a room so they can watch their cool shows. I believe they're watching Captain Underpants.
Yeah,
Halloween edition. So we are jammed in the bedroom recording. So if you hear noises in the background yet again, not spooky spectres.
Although there'll be fart noises and all sorts from that show. It'll be good.
Yeah. Yep, and then you're not going to know if it's us or if it's the show. Ooh, mystery. Anyway, we'll stop shooting the shit. Tonight we are talking about strange call-outs by police officers. So I've scoured the internet and I found you some bloody good ones, as well as some that I've read in previous researchy episodes of myself when I've delved into a rabbit hole. And yes, there's some bloody good ones, and ones where you just sort of go, you can't not kind of believe that was something weird because, like, a whole gang of police officers saw something. And some of them...
Quantity is the key.
But it's not just paranormal. Like, I'm just talking weird, creepy call-outs for police officers. So that's what we're talking tonight. Start to get into the swing of Halloween, which I'm a bit sad I've not been able to get into my proper Halloween zone yet.
It's been sad, but we have been very hectic.
We've been hectic. We've been preparing houses for selling. Or house. We don't have two. We've just got the one.
I only knew of the
houses. Oh, you didn't know about the other one? So we've been in the dungeon of all that and school holidays, etc. So I've not been able to get fully into my normal Halloween extravaganza. But it is coming. It's the 10th of October, so it's long overdue. This is the latest I've ever got to without decking the house out.
Some would say.
But I have received my candy order. There is 2 kilos of candy corn in our cupboard.
Just enough.
So we're getting there. Do not fear. The Queen of Halloween is still here. Oh!
Good one.
Yes. Now, folks, are you comfortable? Do you have a drink? Are those lights out? Is there a candle flickering by your side? Prepare to be spooked. Thank you, Jimmy. Jimmy's just handed me a handful of hair out of my hairbrush. He was such a romantic.
You can have that.
Thank you. So long as you're not doing any witchcraft and burning it or anything.
Nah.
Is that how you've kept me here all these years?
I thought I was wooing you with my wildest ways.
Dang it! She's tricked on.
Your approach.
Anyway.
Sorry.
Have you ever heard of a strange police call out that's turned weird?
Only a few small ones on YouTube, but nothing too crazy.
And what were those? Do you remember those?
Oh, this was a while ago I watched them.
A while ago?
Yeah, that was a while ago.
Wally go? Where's Wally go?
Over there.
Anyway, I think
I can't remember.
dead end there.
Dead end.
Dead end.
I got
Okay.
nothing.
Well, I've got tons, so I've done at least some work.
I've done no work at all. I just rocked up here.
What a surprise!
Yeah.
Anyway, let's get on with the show, shall we? So, to start tonight's police officer episode, I wanted to start with an Australian story. So this one is really, really cool. Prepare your butts. Whilst working in remote Australia, we were forced to move on an elderly Aboriginal man because the other locals had accused him of witchcraft and other things. We drove him to his township, approximately 1.5 hours drive away. The other locals were terrified of him as he was rumoured to be a witch doctor. We dropped him off and warned him not to return to town for 3 days. We turned the vehicle around, drove back to town, flying probably about 100 miles per hour. It took 45 minutes to drive back. Upon our return, we find the same elderly Aboriginal man sitting in the street. To this day, neither of us can explain it.
Whoa.
Maybe the other locals had every right to be scared.
That's pretty cool.
That is just bizarre.
Yeah, that's out there.
Imagine you've dropped him off 1.5 hours away
And
into
then-
another community.
It's just teleported.
Well, that's literally what it was. The caption was, elderly man teleported out of town.
That's
And the fact that
crazy.
he was rumoured to be a witch doctor and
Already,
had magical
yeah.
powers, and then he does this.
Mm.
I would love to
Yeah.
know what happened next. I would love to know whether they picked him up again
And-
or whether they just went, holy
Yep,
shit, and just
no.
left him.
We tried.
I
Nah.
think there'd be a part of you would just sort of go, hang on, that's not possible.
Yeah.
If he's managed to do that, good on him.
Yep. Successfully beat the system. Good job.
Good job. Good job, fella. That's a pretty weird one.
That's really cool.
Now, my only skeptical theory about that one is, could he just have been a simple case of misidentification?
Possibly.
Could it have just been someone who looked a lot like him?
Well, you won't know, yeah, like you're saying, until you get the next part of the story.
Yeah.
That's the definitive answer in there.
Because, I mean, not to generalise, but older people... older people, all older people of every nationality, they do all start to look a lot alike. They tend to don a uniform, like turtlenecks and cardigans.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
And in every country,
No matter.
there is it's
The
like
generics.
it's a trademark. You know, it's a natural progression that
I
this
hear
is
what
what
you're
they
saying.
end up looking. You know, everyone tends to dress a certain way.
This is true.
Yeah.
Over a certain age.
Like there's a lot of Bobs and there's a lot of know
Yeah.
irises
yeah.
and
Cheryl's
Marys
always
and
the same. She's really good at sponge cake, no matter what happens.
yeah. No, Cheryl's not the one that's good at sponge cake.
Isn't she?
No, she's better at your Anzacs.
Yeah, right.
You're getting it wrong there. Martha's the one that's good at sponge cake.
Sorry.
Sponge cake.
Sorry.
Anyway, so that's what I think this story may very well have just been. Another elderly Aboriginal man who looked an awful lot like the other gentleman.
I'm more worried that the police were doing over 100 miles an hour
Yeah,
because we're not measured in miles an hour in Australia, and
that converts
that's
to...
speeding.
That's speeding.
Real bad.
And if they're not chasing a crim,
Yeah.
they're breaking a law.
In paper form.
Hooning! Anywho, on to the next. I'm just going to keep going because it's funny.
Good.
Now, this next story I love. It's not my favourite of the night, but this one is pretty great.
Pretty good.
Yeah. So this one took place in New Mexico, and the person who wrote the story, it was his uncle was the sheriff of this small town in New Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
He was a very hardcore person, very straight-laced. He didn't joke around. He was very serious about his job, very serious about everything. So
Mr. Dry.
everything was black and white, and didn't believe in anything mystical or paranormal. I thought it was all a load of bollocks.
Yep.
So this is this
most exotic thing I believe in is cheeseburgers.
ketchup. Yeah, fancy. I'm not having any of that fancy sauce. Call it tomato sauce, for God's sake. So anyway, in this town, there was a well-known reporter named Bob D, and he would be at every single crash or just anything to do with fires or police.
The town snoop.
The snoop, and he was always there trying to get a scoop.
A scoop on the next week's news story.
Yeah, and it was there. It was from the local paper. He was always there. Every single crash site, everything. He was onto it because he had a radar that he would listen to, and he'd meet them all there. Yep. He was part of the scenery.
Yeah.
So he was a bit of a joker himself, and he'd mess with people when he got to the scene because he knew everybody by flicking the backs of their ears. And that was his trademark move. He did it all the time, and then people would react and sort of turn around and hit their ear thinking it was a bug, and then they'd see that it was Bob. He used to do it. What a jokester. He used to do it all the time. So he died of lung cancer very quickly. So he'd obviously had it a while. And then it took him pretty quickly, much like what happened with Greg.
Yeah, came in hard and fast.
Yeah. His wife buried him, but he wanted to be cremated. His wishes were to be cremated. So that sort of leads to why a lot of people think this happened.
Okay.
So for the next few weeks after the funeral, people kept talking about seeing Bob at the car wrecks and fires and all the stuff that he'd used to be at.
Yeah.
They'd just see him. He was just there, as per norm, acting like he was
normal self.
Yeah, interacting with everyone just normal.
Okay.
There were up to 30 reports of this from civilians to the police force. So 30-odd people wrote in or called up or came in and said, but we've seen Bob. So this bloke's uncle did not believe it because he's Mr. No, there's no such thing as that. Come on, whatever.
Yeah.
Until one night, Bob showed up. Oh, no, sorry. One night, the uncle and the auntie showed up at the writer's house.
Oh, yeah.
In a panic. He was pale as paper, had his gun drawn. And they were like, what the hell happened? And then he came in and sat down and took a breath, composed himself, and then explained the following. He said him and his aunt were sitting on the couch in their house watching TV.
Yeah.
His uncle kept scratching his ear over and over. And finally, the aunt asked him what the problem was.
Yeah.
Then he turned around just in time to see the bedroom door open and Bob D standing there in the doorway.
Whoa.
Clear as crystal. The uncle then jumped up, cussed or said something.
Yeah.
Got the auntie's attention, who then turned to also see him there. As soon as they both made eye contact with Bob, he smiled, turned, walked across the living room and out the front door, and closed the door behind himself and was gone.
Whoa.
So they both saw him plain as day. And he'd been standing there flicking his ear for a long time, like, come on. So the uncle got control of himself, ran outside with his gun looking for Bob. Like, obviously I'm going to have to kill him. I don't know what he was thinking there.
He's just not dead enough.
Yeah. I guess, he's been in his house, no matter who it was, you'd probably feel a little bit defensive towards him.
Absolutely.
And at that point, he ran over to this relative's place, to the boy that's writing the story. We went over there and didn't see anything, but the aunt and uncle stayed at their place for the night. They wouldn't go back to their own house.
Yeah, makes sense.
At work the following day, all the guys on the force were giving the uncle a whole lot of, we told you so.
As you would. You can't let that go.
I know, because he's like, you're all crazy. Whatever, you're making it up. Then people around town said they saw Bob D show up at police scenes for at least another 2 to 3 months.
Wow.
This guy that's writing the story, his dad saw him in the dark room of their basement with a friend, and he was flicking their ears.
That's crazy.
During the 3rd month, people that saw him said he was looking worse and worse. And then when the uncle who had denied the whole thing, initially, he reckons he saw him another 2 more times, and each time he saw him, he looked more and more worn.
Okay.
So the theory was that he was decomposing as a ghost. It was reflecting him in his body form. Like it was almost as if he was, I don't know. It all seems very odd to me.
It's very odd.
And that this guy says, every time my ear itches, I get goosebumps.
Yeah.
Because he thinks, is it Bob? Is he back to tickle my ears?
I find it weird that, when you have someone who's such a part of the scenery, you can sort of explain that bit away when you sort of catch a glimpse of someone you're expecting to be there.
Yeah.
I can see that, but then it just gets weird from there. You can't explain someone walking across your lounge room floor. That's a bit...
And that both of you...
Yeah, see the same thing.
Because it's one thing, like, if I see something...
Yeah.
And then I point it out to you and you're like, oh, I can't really see it. But to actually both visibly see a person...
Yeah, would make a massive difference.
How would... If you were, like, a king pro skeptic...
Yeah.
Imagine how disturbing that would be for you.
Yeah, that would wreck you pretty bad.
Because there'd be no way of I can't think of an explanation. Can any of you think of an explanation?
No, that's a good one to stump you on that one.
But then this brings up my theory of residual energy.
Yeah. Yeah, it does.
And the power of suggestion.
Yeah.
If one person thinks they've seen him...
Then what happens then?
And think about the scenes where he was being seen.
Yeah.
Pardon the scenes.
Scenes.
Traumatic, high stress.
Massively.
Freakishly...
But always there. Like,
always
through his life, he was always there.
He was always there. So maybe it is just that they're expecting to see him.
Yeah, that's
so,
what I was meaning.
When you kind of go, you just imagine... Yeah. Like, I've done it. I've been places where you see the same people all the time and you assume that they were there, and then only to find they weren't. Yeah. And it was probably just someone who looked a lot or similar, not even identical, just similar to them. And you just, because you're always seeing them.
But everyone goes through that with Lost and things like that. I mean, even when we had Horton go, it was the same thing. You still would expect them. There was that expectance. So it would manifest in some form to yourself.
Yeah, and we would hear him because you expect to hear him, and then there's that sudden moment of here he comes to come and get cheese because the cheese door opened, and then you hear him get up and then he's not there. Yeah. And I kind of think a lot of it is that you kind of have it that imprinted in your brain maybe. Yeah. But then I don't know how to explain.
No, the rest doesn't make sense at all.
But this is Jimmy and I trying to rationalise it. This is what we do. Anyway, on to the next. This is just a little quick one that I read about that thought was interesting. That there was a story that I came across was the police were called out to... There was a call, a 911 call from a house. When they answered it, there was just static. So there was no voice on the other end. Yeah. Then it hung up, then it called back, then it hung up. So they got multiple calls from this number. So they traced the number, they went out to the scene. Yeah. Only to find it was a house that there was no power, there was all the amenities, everything been cut off because there was a corpse in the house, 5 months old. Yeah. A 5-month-old corpse. Wow. So it was a grown man, not a 5-month-old person, but the corpse had been there for 5 months and no one had known that this man had passed away. And the police officers just had no idea because there was no phone connection. Yeah. There was no power to the building. And obviously this man hadn't done it. He'd been dead for 5 months. Yeah. So I'm thinking perhaps someone came in and found him, maybe a burglar, and then made the call somehow. Maybe you can, because I'm sure you can make emergency phone numbers from... If there's a phone line, I'm pretty sure if you plug a phone in, you are able to make an emergency call. Yeah. So that's how I've rationalised that story. Yeah. That someone might have been breaking in and gone, holy shit, and then just thought, I'll do something about it. If I ring the number, I won't say who I am or they'll know that I've broken in, but I'll just ring the police and they'll come and investigate it. Yeah. That's my theory. What do you think, folks?
That's a good theory.
Or do you think that ghosts can call and report their own deaths and say, "Excuse me, it's getting beyond a joke now. My nose is falling off.
5 months old is just too low.
One of you bastards come and get me." Please excuse the sound of my noisy computer. It's currently living in our room because we don't have a desk anymore.
But it looks so sophisticated.
We're pretending we don't actually live in our house in order to sell our house. Isn't it dumb?
Yeah.
Anywho, this next story is pretty gross. I don't know how I would go if I was a police officer that got called out to this scene. So, the writer has written that a good friend of mine was the youngest recruit to pass police training in the area for a long time. He was 19, he was fresh onto the service. So I went for a pint with him a week later, and you could tell he'd seen things, so I asked him what it was like. He told me about this one call out they got where they got called to a domestic. Mm-hmm. So they're expecting to find people fighting.
Yeah.
They got to the house and opened the door. Instantly, a whole load of sewer rats flooded out. Not pet ones, sewer rats.
Ew.
And there was no one home. The lights were on, the TV was on, quietly, and the loud voices they'd heard arguing when they were outside had just gone. They'd just stopped.
Whoa.
The only life that was there were the rats that ran out of the house. They searched the house, every nook and cranny, and found no one. He and his partner for the evening stayed around for a while to wait and see if anyone came home, but after a few hours no one came. The neighbours couldn't even explain it. So they left. A few minutes later, once they'd left, they got a call to the same address by different people stating there was a pretty heated domestic going on. This time they brought the dog squad to find people, but again the house was deserted. He said the freakiest thing was that the toilet had blatantly just been flushed when they got there, and as the cistern was starting to fill, and the kettle was now boiling on the stove. The dogs found nothing as well. To this day, he doesn't know what the fuck went on.
Whoa. That's pretty crazy. Interesting turn of events.
Pretty weird. But again, my logical brain tells me there's squatters or there's people living there who know. But if they brought in dogs...
Dogs is the hardest thing there. You can't...
But I heard a story. Now, I'm sorry if this gives you nightmares because it did disturb... It bothered me for a long time. But you can look this up if you're into this stuff. There is it's quite a common report to police of homeless people living in people's walls.
This was that thing you were saying.
And also in the roof space. And what they do is very clever. They're nocturnal, so they'll sleep all day.
Yeah.
And then obviously when you're asleep at night, they'll creep down, or when you're out at work.
Yeah.
They live in your house. They use your stuff. They eat your food. Now,
use your hairbrush.
Yeah, well,
your deodorant.
One particular thing. That's right. One particular story that I'd heard was this young girl who'd bought an apartment.
Yeah.
Now there's so many disturbing ones. So many disturbing ones. So she used to swear she heard people walking around, cupboards opening, fridges opening. Started to think it was a ghost because there was no trace of anyone.
Yeah.
But she would find her bread would just disappear. She'd be like, I'm sure there was a loaf there. I'm sure I had at least half a loaf. There'd be like 2 bits left.
Yeah.
Her milk, same thing. So all your basic things. If you live alone, you got good track. When you live as a family, you can't keep track. You know, it's normal to have food disappearing. But if you're living alone, what the hell?
You know what's going on.
Yeah.
You should know what's going on.
Yeah. And so after a while, she got pretty fed up. She'd had called the police and said, I swear someone's in my house. They'd come and investigated, found nothing. And then sure enough, kept happening. So she set up a camera because she thought maybe it is a ghost or something.
Yeah.
She set up a camera and in a cupboard space that she didn't even realise could open above the kitchen cupboards, this person pulled this little thing across, dropped down onto the kitchen bench, and started just helping themselves to all their food. And then very casually was just sitting down, watched her television. This is in the middle, this is like 2 a.m. And then no qualms whatsoever, climbs back into the roof space within seconds of her getting up. And can you imagine viewing that video, knowing as you're watching it that person is there?
Yeah, no.
How terrifying is that?
Yep.
Being completely unaware. Now, there's so many of these stories. There's another one I read that was utterly terrifying of a little boy who kept telling his parents that there's someone in the wall, because he'd come out, and if the kid saw him, he'd just go, shh.
Yeah.
And there was a hole in the wall that he could see through, and he would peek through that first. So he used to see an eye through a hole in the wall.
Oh, no.
And then the man had come out, and the parents just thought, he's just imagining things, he's having nightmares. Can you imagine being that poor kid?
Whole lot more therapy needed there.
Yeah, and that was legit. So there was a homeless man living in their walls.
God.
Yeah, pretty awful.
Yeah, that's not cool at all.
But there was another one with someone under a girl's bed. That one I remember you telling me the under the bed one was just too much.
Yeah.
But look them up, because if you like a scare, it is the month of spook, and we like to scare you on this show. Have a look at people living in other people's houses. It's terrifying.
See, again, the only thing that I still don't get with this other story is the dogs. It is so hard to cross the dogs out
Without them picking up
something, because they have phenomenal noses on them.
But
if you don't know what you're tracking, I suppose, maybe.
Yeah, and also if there's like a cellar or an underground area that's sort of pretty closed off.
I suppose it would be hard to pick up scent too if the house was full of sewer rats.
That's true. The rat smell would probably put them off.
Mm.
I don't know. If there's anyone out there that's a dog expert,
Interesting.
write in and tell us if we're on the right track. So, along the lines of being unaware of things happening in your house, this one's a bit chilling. So, an elderly woman was calling the police this particular evening, and it was pouring with rain when she rang up. Now, police very regularly get reports from frightened elderly women.
It makes sense. Yeah.
Who live on their own, because it's very, I mean, even as a woman of my age,
it can be quite
as a
scary.
woman of any age in this world, the way the world is, it is very frightening sometimes. And if you do hear sounds you're not familiar with, apparently one of the biggest calls they get are from lonely, frightened elderly women.
Yep.
So they went out just assuming, she called and said she was hearing footsteps in her house. And she thought it must be a ghost, because she regularly heard the sound of someone walking upstairs, but she lived by herself.
Okay.
So they went out to check it out and make sure that everything was okay. She stayed on the line with the 911 operator because she was frightened. So she'd called before.
Yeah, right.
So I think this was the second call. So she called again and said, "Look, there's someone in my there's a ghost in my house because I can hear footsteps." Yeah. And they're all thinking she's a nutter. Poor old lady.
Poor lady.
So she's very frightened. She stayed on the line. After about 3 minutes, after she initially called in, she said that there was actually a man standing outside in her backyard staring at her through the sliding glass door.
Whoa.
Petrified, the woman froze on the spot and continued to stare directly at the man, so scared to take her eyes off her.
Yeah.
Off him.
Yeah.
It happens. I've had this exact thing happen where I've seen someone outside through a window and you're too scared to take your eyes off them.
Yeah.
Because you think the second I look away, they're gonna
go,
or they're gonna come get me.
One of the two.
So she's keeping her eyes on this bloke. Petrified, she froze on the spot, continued to stare at the man. For the next minute or two, she said that he was just standing there, still as could be, staring at her. Eventually, the man slunk off out of sight. When the police got there, because they're like, oh, shit, okay, maybe she really did have a prowler.
Yeah.
When they got there, about 12 minutes after the call first came in, we went to the front door. I remained in the foyer with the woman, and the other officers went in the backyard to see if the man was still hiding out there or if there were any traces of him.
Yeah.
I spoke with her for several minutes until the other officer returned. He said there was no trace of anyone having been in the backyard. We set off to do a quick sweep before we left to make sure the house was all clear. In her living room, the room that had the sliding glass door, we discovered a trail of mud and footprints inside the house. I asked the woman if she'd been outside at all that day or if anyone had been over to visit her. She said no, that she lived alone and that no one had come by to visit. The woman was very old, probably around 85, and had very poor eyesight and was hard of hearing. The woman obviously had seen this man's reflection and mistakenly thought he was in front of her on the other side of the glass in the backyard, but in reality he'd been standing only a few feet behind her in the same room while she was on the phone to the police.
What?
He was in the house with her. Nothing was stolen, broken or out of place, so we don't know what his intentions were. Who knows what would have happened had she not have stayed on the line with the operator. I know it sounds like something out of a campfire story, but this was honestly one of the most unnerving and creepy experiences I've had while on duty.
That is insane.
Can you imagine finding out
that the whole time
he'd been right behind you?
Oof. Poor lady.
Poor lady. And you know what? I've been in the position where I have told countless times someone's outside my window.
Mm-hmm.
Night after night, there's someone there.
Yeah.
They made their presence known, always made a noise.
Yeah.
And then it took, literally, it took me having to see him through the glass.
Yeah.
My dad, the dogs, everyone seeing through the glass before anyone believed me.
Yeah.
And it is the most terrifying, awful thing when you know you can hear someone.
Yeah.
You know there's someone out there, but no one believes you.
Yeah.
It's awful.
I couldn't imagine it.
It's
Personally,
awful.
Myself.
Yeah, so he'd worked out my bus route. This is my creepy police story. Because I used to take this particular bus along Wanneroo Drive, and it was when I worked. I had late uni.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't get back till late, and then other nights I got late and caught the bus from work as well.
Yeah.
But this particular night I always did the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd worked out exactly where I lived because he'd followed me off the bus, and the only reason I knew that was I'd seen him on the bus.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I always saw him on the bus, and it creeped me. He creeped me out all the time, and so I worked out that when I saw him through the window. When eventually he stuffed up because he got too cocky.
Yeah.
But he had no fear. He stood playing at the window with 3 dogs barking, jumping up at the window, and stared straight at me.
That's crazy.
Didn't move a muscle till my dad.
Yeah.
Came through, saw him. Dad got defensive voice on and then went to let the dogs out.
Yeah.
Who then took off after him. So I don't know if he was running on pure adrenaline, but the creepy thing was when the cops came out, they found vomit.
Whoa.
So he'd gotten so worked up, he'd thrown up.
Wow.
Right in front of the fence before he jumped the fence.
Yeah.
I know. How creepy. Imagine being a teenage girl and then thinking it's all in your head and then having it actually, he's there and that's the creep from the bus in the backyard.
Too much, man.
I shortly moved after that.
Yeah, understandably.
Yeah, but I still caught buses and trains and walked in the dark by myself because I feel like it's not fair that girls can't do that. And I know that it means you're at higher risk of things, but you got to survive. You got to get to work. You got to get to uni. So anyway, that's my creepy story. But the cops were bloody awesome that night.
Yeah.
Because you couldn't. I was like, how the fuck am I going to sleep?
Oh yeah.
How am I ever going to sleep again?
Exactly.
Knowing that he'd been out there most nights watching me through my blinds.
Yeah.
So, and then they didn't catch him, obviously. He'd taken off before the cops got there.
Yeah, yeah.
So I was convinced he was going to come back, but luckily the police were great, and they did, for 2 hours, they did a lap.
Yeah, just kept an eye out.
Yeah, and just kept an eye out for him. So that was awesome. They were really good. And then they continued to do that for about a week.
Yeah.
So every night they put our house on their patrol route. Yeah. So that was very comforting to know. So this is my segue into helpful police officers, because what would we do without them? Chaos. And I know they get a bad rap. And I mean, undoubtedly there are crooked cops out there, but as a whole,
They got a pretty garbage
They've
job.
got a garbage job. They don't get paid zillions for what they do, and they do a bloody good job. They put themselves on the line. They deal with dickheads constantly.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine.
No, because you're not going to get called out to the nice people.
No, of course you're not. Which leads me to this next story about probably the best police paranormal related story that I've ever read. This is just bloody gorgeous.
Yeah.
So, one of the nice things about working in a small town is the unique problems that you learn to solve. One such problem belonged to a sweet little old lady who lived in a big old mansion over the old section of town. She had a ghost infestation. That's right.
Oh, no.
A ghost infestation. Poor old lady. Now, most of the time this was all right. I think she liked the company of the ghosts. But once in a while, the ghosts would get a wee bit rowdy. Thereupon, she'd call the SO, and one of us would be dispatched to take care of the situation. We'd show up, she'd let us into the huge old house, the officers would go upstairs and read a stern warning to the ghosts. I found that if you took George C. Scott's speech from Patton, complete with pacing back and forth and gestures, but cleaned up the language a bit, the ghosts would normally be impressed enough to keep quiet for a week or two. Once you were done, you'd go back downstairs, where the lady would stuff you full of homemade cinnamon rolls and iced tea.
Yes.
I know, I would love to get that call out. Then you'd swap gossip for a while, have a good old yarn. One day, the sheriff gets a bright idea. We take care of the situation once and for all. Plans are made, people are notified. We wait for the call. And one Friday evening, she calls. Not only are the ghosts rowdy, it sounds like they're having a party. And delivered in whispered tones. She thinks she heard some girl ghosts giggling up there.
What?
And that wasn't right. They're not allowed lady visitors.
No.
What is this? So the call goes out. We load up our full-time officers, all 4 of them.
Yeah.
We get all the reserves, mostly security from local federal facility. Anyone else you got? Any other security guards? Get Phil from the video store. They don their ninja gear. We mount our trusty steed, which is a reworked career-era ambulance. We sway and sputter and backfire and shudder and creak our way over the hills. Once on the location, a hasty whispered conference takes place. Who looks the least threatening? That would be yours truly, having hysterics in the back of the beat-up ambulance. Up I go. I knock on the door. I tell the little old lady that we're here to solve a problem. We seat her on the porch swing with a blanket. Crash! 20 SWAT rhinos in full gear hit the door. Clear the bottom floor tactically. Flow the stairs. And then the shouting starts. Hey, you! Yeah, you! Out, out, out! One here! Out, out, out! Clear! You! Yeah, you! Where do you think you're going? Out, out, out! Thus, were our thoroughly scared and cowed, albeit invisible subjects, herded to the front lawn, where the sheriff is standing on the roof of the ambulance, SWAT vehicle, delivering his patented fire and brimstone, straight path, crooked path speech, complete with finger pointing, arm waving, and what only an absolute cynic would consider an empty lawn.
They gave him the full hands on the hips.
The full performance of big lecture of all these ghosts that were on the front lawn.
Fantastic.
All the while, little darling Deirdre, or whatever her name was, is sitting on her porch swing with a blanket, watching it all unfold. Watched with great interest by all the neighbours, of course.
Yeah.
Heck, most of the town showed up, who promptly got out their lawn chairs and sodas and snacks and basically started a block party. Once we were done and had allowed the thoroughly chastised and completely humbled spirits back upstairs, we sat in her kitchen in black BDUs, rifles, shotguns, etc., eating cinnamon rolls and drinking iced tea. During this last part, the lady whispered to me that we had missed one.
No.
Never said I wasn't fast on my mental feet. I promptly whispered back to her that he was too young to be subjected to such a scary action. She examined him closely and declared that I was probably right. It took the ghosts almost 3 months to go back to their rowdy ways. Now, isn't that great?
That's a good effort.
Not only the cops, but they've rounded up
Everyone.
whoever looks cop-ish and has cop-ish uniforms.
You'll do.
Come on, guys, we got to help her out. Isn't that the best?
That's a
And then
great
probably, let's be realistic, all of them knowing full well at the end of it is homemade cinnamon rolls.
It's, it's hard to pass up.
I think I'd do anything for cinnamon rolls.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Isn't that a great story?
Yeah.
And it is so true. It's just, small towns are good like that.
They are. They have their good points.
It is ridiculous how I've noticed from living where we are. We've had a good run for a while, but we had a shocking run. We had some terrible criminals living next door.
That was interesting times.
It was interesting times. But I loved how nonchalant and casual the cops were.
Oh, when you see it day in, day out, what could you do other than shake your head for the most part?
Yeah, but I liked the courtesy drop-ins. So, they'd be over there raiding, drug raid.
Full
drug raiding. This is in a small country town, but yet, of all the houses, it's got to be our house. I like that the local police, in their normal uniforms, not their SWAT gear, casually just trip-drop over, just letting you know. We've just got a little bit of a raid happening next door. Don't be alarmed.
Something exciting.
It's okay, there's me in my exercise clothes. What the fuck's going on? Like, okay, great. Good luck with that. And have you seen anything suspicious? Have you
Good luck on your raid.
Yeah, have you seen this guy around? Because he's got like 8 warrants. Oh yeah. That's interesting.
Yep, that's some fun stuff.
Yes, we literally were on Crim Watch for a while. We had to keep an eye out for this felon who lived next door. Who was
Yep.
Good times. Not anymore. Nice neighbour in there now.
Yep.
Now I thought, as it's October and it's Halloweeny, just to round up this episode, the last one I would discuss it's a bit horrid. It's not really one that it's a bit gross, but it's very Halloweeny.
So you're going from a nice, happy story. Let's finish on a real doozy.
On a creepy note. So the police were called out to this house where not only one lot of people had called, but another lot of people had called, very concerned because there was a strange man at the back of the garden and he hadn't moved for a very long time. He was just standing there and they were all getting the creeps.
Oh.
Obviously because he was in the yard.
Yeah.
So it was nighttime. They were frightened. Who is he? And they didn't want to go out and investigate for themselves. So they called the police and the police came along, approached the man to find him dead.
Hey?
He'd been robbing one of the houses and was trying to scale a very sharp fence.
Oh no.
And he'd managed to impale himself on said fence. So they've called up thinking there's a prowler in the yard.
And he's just scarecrowed himself.
He's literally scarecrowed himself.
Ay.
And that's why he hadn't moved.
I knew. Well, the job's done.
You're under
No.
How awful is that?
Oh, that's not cool.
Imagine seeing that in your garden. Like, it's one thing to see a prowler. It's another thing to see someone's just the most horrific thing
in the backyard.
In your backyard. You'd rip the fence out.
Yeah.
You're like, well,
it's time to change the veggie garden idea we had.
That's not safe for the grandkids. Let's pull that one out. Jesus Christ.
Whoa.
Yeah,
that's pretty intense.
It's a bloody doozy.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what though, I just remembered thinking about police. I can remember one of our neighbours, just his weapon that he had. Just thinking about, when you see someone in your yard, I think every person that grew up in the city, you have a weapon.
You grab the nearest thing, or
you have something that you've worked out is the most efficient thing to have that will hurt.
Yep.
Or that you'll at least have some fighting chance to have. I always usually just had when you used to work away, it was the metal rolling pin.
Yep.
Because I could jab and whack. But our next door neighbour in North Perth, he had a air-powered, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like a post with like a little cup on the end that had some sort of like an air pressure thing. And he put a pool ball in it.
Oof.
And he'd fire pool balls.
Whoa.
That was his weapon. And the reason he needed it was because he sold drugs.
Oh, dear. Wow.
I remember thinking, what the hell is that? But then thinking, that would be painful if you caught one of them.
A mess of you, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Oh.
It's like cannon fodder.
Yeah, what weapon do you have under your pillow? I want to hear it. Seriously.
Yeah.
Send in or comment below on the episode. What do you sleep with under your pillow or in your drawer?
Protection piece?
What have you got to fight off bad guys? I think we did discuss at one of the previous stories when we heard noises. There was a vacuum handle involved.
That's right. There was.
There is a point you grab anything.
Anything goes.
Anything, but then when you live by yourself in the city, which I wasn't by myself, but everywhere I lived was a share house situation, so there were nights you would be there alone.
Yeah.
You had to have some kind of
just an idea on what you were going to do. Mm-hmm.
I would literally go through the drawer before bed in the kitchen and go, oh, okay, scissors tonight or rolling pin? I might cut myself while I'm asleep. Oh, I don't know. Knife's too risky. I could use it against me. No, I'll go the cheese grater on the face.
Pile driver to the face.
Pile driver to the face. But seriously, just thinking about that. If someone was coming at you with a cheese grater,
you would be surprised.
You'd be pretty scared. You'd be like, fuck! Don't grate my face off. Because, sometimes it's the little cuts that hurt way more than getting whacked in the head. I've been hit in the head several times. That compared to, paper cuts or cactus spikes or
a push bike graze.
Or a push bike graze is so ouchy. Bernie's hot pizza Bernie's.
Just going to attack them with a push bike and see if they...
Look, trade in all your weapons and just sleep with a cheese grater.
Yeah.
It's the best choice. On the note of the pleasantries of cheese graters, it's been an absolute pleasure tonight, Jimmy. Thanks for joining me yet again in the Spooky Seats.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in and listening. And sorry it's been a bit here and there lately with all our busyness. But we will continue to bring you episodes when we can.
Imagine if you got one of those really super fine cheese graters, for a really fine cheddar or something.
Not as effective.
No, it'd be harder.
Because you have to get that pressure behind it. Anyway. Wishing you a wonderful weekend.
Yes.
A spooky weekend.
Yes.
And be sure to tune back because it's coming. My Halloween mania is kicking off. And I will be bringing you some pretty great stories. I'm on the hunt for some beauties. I would love to hear your stories. Mm-hmm. Got to admit the local story well is a little bit dry at the moment. So come on, send them in. If you like the show and you like hearing the stories, you got to help me out and send some in, guys. I'd love to hear them. So please tune in next week. Thanks again for listening. This has been Morgan.
And Jimmy.
Stay creepy. Bye.